So it's my pleasure to introduce Alison Gray today. She started working as an assistant professor at the University of Washington in 2017. She got her PhD in physical oceanography from the University of Washington in 2014. Her research focused on ocean circulation and its impact on the physics and chemistry of the climate system. And she uses a multitude of observation, including profiling floats, gliders, and ships, as well as satellite. And today she's going to give us a presentation on recent observation of the circulation and carbon cycle of the Southern Ocean. Thank you so much, Alison.
Oh, thanks very much, Cecile. And thank you to all of you. Okay, my point here, hopefully you've all had enough time to look at this, that the Southern Ocean plays this important role in the global carbon cycle. And the reason that it does that is because it's sort of intimately tied to its role in the global overturning circulation. So that's kind of shown schematically here, and I've just kind of drawn this line at approximately 30 south, and you can see that in the Southern Ocean, you have all these different water masses shown by these different colored ribbons, and kind of coming into and leaving the Southern Ocean. There's a lot of water mass transformations there, and we can look at this in a sort of zonally averaged picture, which is sort of historically how we've thought of it. So the traditional view of the Southern Ocean overturning circulation, or I guess of the circulation in general, is that the zonal flow is really dominated by this Antarctic circumpolar current that travels eastward around the continent like this, and that's sort of coming out of this page. But then in a 2D sense, in a zonally average sense, the circulation is shown in this depth latitude kind of here. And it's kind of comprised of these two meridional overturning cells that are linked by this upwelling of deep water. So these upper circumpolar deep water, lower circumpolar, all these deep waters kind of get upwelled in the Southern Ocean and are returned north as Antarctic intermediate water in the sort of upper and intermediate water layers, and then or as Antarctic bottom water. Okay, and this upwelled deep water is important for the carbon cycle because it's been isolated from the atmosphere for many hundreds of years, and so it has really negligible anthropogenic CO2. It's some of the oldest water really that we find in the planet or in the global ocean. So it's very it has negligible anthropogenic CO2, but it's very enriched in remineralized carbon and nutrients because as this water's been traveling around the planet, it's had a lot of time to accumulate these inorganic materials as organic, dead material is raining down from the surface layer, like biological material. Okay, so that's the sort of traditional view of the circulation, and that's kind of shown here where how it impacts the surface fluxes and the carbon uptake in the Southern Ocean. And this is based on some model runs using pre-industrial forcing, and the plot on the left, and then a zonally average picture is shown on the side. And you see that in the sort of natural or pre-industrial carbon fluxes, you get a lot of outgassing where this upwelled deep water is reaching the surface and bringing all that natural DIC back up to the surface, and then to the north, nutrients also fuel a lot of biological productivity, and so you get an uptake of carbon as the water moves further to the north in the surface layer, and then superimposed on that is this anthropogenic signal, and which kind of shifts everything sort of down towards more uptake of carbon as you're adding carbon to the surface in the atmosphere. And so you get still a little bit of outgassing in this estimate in the very sort of around 60 south, and you can see this in the model as well, but you get a lot more uptake of carbon. And this is sort of our traditional view is that the contemporary uptake of carbon in the Southern Ocean is significant because of this well, it's summarized here. So in this picture, this nice schematic from Gruber et al. In 2019. So what it's showing is that on the left-hand side, this this picture of the anthropogenic CO2 shown in the colors, but the lines show you the isopycnals, and the kind of sense of the arrows show you the sense of the circulation. These overturning circulation, we have upwelled water coming up in the sort of in the ACC in the Antarctic, or just south of the Antarctic circumpolar current, and it has very negligible anthropogenic CO2, so it takes up a lot of CO2 once it reaches the surface there, and that acts as a significant sink of anthropogenic CO2. On the side, you see the sort of the same cartoon picture, but for the natural CO2 cycle, and you see, you know, this upwelled water has a lot of natural CO2, and as it reaches the surface, you get sort of an outgassing balanced by an uptake further to the north, shown by these arrows. And that, you know, sort of our best estimates based on shipboard observations and there's a sort of a net, these two things balance out, and the natural carbon cycle is about a net zero for the whole Southern Ocean. So then that's sort of our accounting for the contemporary carbon sink in the Southern Ocean. Okay, so this picture is very zonally averaged, though. And I guess one of the main points I want to make here today is this importance of the spatial variability. And so the traditional view of the Southern Ocean is a very zonally averaged picture. And that's been very useful, I think, for understanding the dynamics and for understanding a lot of the impacts on the biogeochemical cycling. But as we get more and more observations, and more sort of better understanding, we really see this emerging view that the spatial variability plays a crucial role in the overturning circulation. And there's been a lot of work in this in the past sort of decade or so, and both looking at spatial variability in the surface waters and exchange, where that sort of northward exchange happens, as well as looking sort of further down in the water column. So Thompson and Navier Garabato and Dufour et al. In 2015, and like I said, many others have looked at this mostly based on models, and looked at where this deep water is upwelled, and they found that it's really primarily localized at regions downstream of topographic obstacles. And that's kind of shown in this plot on the right-hand side. In the top plot, this is kind of a heat map of the percent of particles that reach, or that sort of cross the 1,000 meter depth surface. So, and this is all based on, or this is all published in this nice article by Veronica Tamsin in 2017. And CM2.6 is a so a tenth of a degree coupled climate model run by GFDL. And what we did with the paper was these Lagrangian particles in the deep water, sort of up here at 30 south, and then tracked these particles as they got advected along, and found and then looked at where they crossed different depth surfaces. So the top plot is showing 1,000 meters, and then the bottom plot is showing 200 meters. So this is, and then we're kind of coloring in areas with sort of dark red colors are where there's a lot of particles crossing that surface at that location. And so you can see that it's not really happening in lots of, sort of in this widespread everywhere in the Southern Ocean, but this vertical transport, this upwelling of this deep water is really happening in these specific areas. And these are all associated with topographic features. So regions where the Antarctic circumpolar current interacts with the bottom features in the Southern Ocean. And also, those are also associated with regions of high eddy kinetic energy. which are shown in these blue contours. This is surface eddy kinetic energy, but so these are regions where you have a lot of variability, a lot of eddies, and it's sort of in this paper and many others have shown that that's connected intimately with this upwelling of deep water, part of the overturning circulation. And once you get to the more surface layers, things look a little bit different, and these pictures become a little bit more dependent. So I think that's still an active area of research, is how does the water exchange with the mid-air, where then it ultimately does exchange with the atmosphere, and what are the important things and where are those things happening. And just another a few years ago that looked at this from a model point of view did find that this has big so these processes we think are associated with mesoscale eddies, and if you look at a model with that's not resolving eddies, you don't find the same sort of thing. So you find that the upwelling is much more diffuse, and it also changes the time scale, across which it's the time scale that it takes for one upwell. So that's was shown in this paper, and sort of schematically, you might get the same sort of zonally averaged picture. So this is if you were to look at these two model runs, one at 1 degree and one at a tenth of a degree. We actually ran a whole series of resolutions, but the zonally average picture is the same, but you actually do see quite a bit of differences in how long it takes for particles to upwell and sort of what their trajectories are as they go around the Antarctic circumpolar current. And this does have an impact too. Interesting. This wasn't part of the paper, but these model runs also have a couple BGC model run going with them as well. And so we the carbon fluxes, and you do see an impact, a change in the carbon flux in these different resolutions in this region where these particles are reaching the surface up here in the upper ocean. So that's kind of, I think, motivation that these small-scale processes, there's a lot of things that change in a model when you change the resolution, but these small-scale processes do have an impact on the tracer distributions and air-sea exchange. And then so they're all based on models, and most of my work actually really is focused on using observations from a variety of things, but one of the main things is from the Argo array. So I've been doing a lot of work with looking at Argo observations in the Southern Ocean, and this plot is just to show, kind of illustrate how the Southern Ocean in particular has been, the observations of temperature and salinity from the float array has just been transformed, or has transformed our understanding of the Southern Ocean and our ability to observe it. So, much more data from Argo. This is only through 2014. Then we had, sort of deep profiles in the World Ocean Database before, and the Southern Ocean was pretty sparsely covered. And one of the things that I've been working on is using these observations, both the trajectory data from the floats as well as the profile data, to estimate geostrophic velocities sort of in the top 2,000 meters of the water column. And so this is sort of ongoing work, but I'm showing here my sort of updated estimate of the circulation in the Southern Ocean. This is at 1,000 decibars in the stream function, just showing you sort of the time mean circulation, and you can see the contours are showing just the circumpolar part of the flow where the ACC is, and you can see that there certainly is. It's not this uniform, smooth, sort of zonally average picture. The circulation actually has a lot of variability depending on where you are, and these regions where you get a lot of very strong flow and meanders in the ACC are intimately tied to the influence of this topography, like I mentioned before. And so kind of ongoing work in my group is to use Argo observations and satellite observations to kind of examine the role of mesoscale eddies in the overturning circulation sort of directly from observations, and as well as looking at mesoscale eddy kinetic energy in the Southern Ocean and as well as globally. And then I have 4 minutes. I just want to say a few things more about the impact on the carbon cycle. And we have historically not had a lot of observations from the Southern Ocean of carbon. That's probably not surprising because it's a very harsh place to work. And where we do have observations, most of the blue areas are only really happening in a few months of the year, which are the summer months. So we don't have a lot of wintertime observations. And so in recognition of this and many other sort of motivating factors, the SOCOM project, which is the Southern Ocean Carbon and Climate Observations and Modeling Project, has been deploying biogeochemical Argo floats in the Southern Ocean since 2014. So this is sort of an idea of kind of where the floats have gone. This is a little bit of an old map, but the project is continuing on until 2024. So I think there's deployed close to 200 floats and more to come. And so we can use, these floats are like regular Argo floats. They're measuring things like pH and oxygen and nitrate, as well as some bio-optical properties. And some work that I did used these data to estimate carbon fluxes. So surface, use the pH data along with an empirical estimate of alkalinity to estimate PCO2 from the floats. That was really what Nancy Williams led. And then using float-based PCO2 estimate, we can estimate what the surface CO2 fluxes are. So you can kind of get estimates that look something like this. This is kind of showing all the float data. This is the most current estimate where, yeah, so you can see we have a lot more sort of spatial coverage, and this estimate the based PCO2 and air-state exchange. We can kind of separate floats into regions and look at the annual seasonal cycle of carbon in these regions and compare it to our best guess of based on ship observations. So these different sort of commonly used climate and Schutzer. It's a global carbon project. And the point really is that with this, we find that there's a lot of outgassing. So positive, this is the annual mean CO2. A lot of outgassing in high latitude Antarctic southern, sort of pretty close to the sea ice. And that's represented in the previous estimates. And this all in other properties that we're measuring from the floats, like nitrate here. So nitrate is much higher than you would expect based on shipboard data, and also oxygen. There's a similar signal. So this water is very low in oxygen, very high in DIC, and high in nitrate. So it kind of is indicative of that it's all circumpolar deep water that's kind of reaching the surface and outgassing, causing a lot of outgassing. And this is, maybe kind of coming back to the role of spatial, let's see, I know I'm running out of time, so I want to skip a few things, but this was even this sort of finding that we have a lot more outgassing in this high latitude part of Southern Ocean than when we look at the float data compared to when we just look at the ship data, was also confirmed by this paper that was actually now published by Seth Bushinsky, where we combined the ship data and the float data together using a neural network mapping method that used, and you can see that even in the annual net average, adding in the float data causes a whole lot of a significant increase in the outgassing in the Southern Ocean, and it's mostly happening in the Indian and the Pacific, and there's sort of not much of a change in the Atlantic Ocean. And so that's led to a sort of revision, a proposed revision to the contemporary, or to the natural CO2 cycle in this paper, saying that actually we have a lot more, we have increased outgassing here, and the anthropogenic carbon uptake we think is probably about the same. So that the net result is that we have less of a sink of total carbon in the Southern Ocean than we might have expected, and just based on shipboard data. And the real, you know, kind of, and I'm running out of time, so I want to make sure yeah, I don't want to go too far over, but you know, I think the main message, and there's a lot of ongoing work to kind of look at this a little bit further, but the main thing that we're finding from the floats in a number of different studies is that it's the Indian and the Pacific Ocean, so the zonal variability in the Southern Ocean, where we're finding a lot of this outgassing signal and this high DIC water that's reaching the surface in the Indian and the Pacific Ocean, and less so in the Atlantic. And it's also something that's happening in the winter. So it's the sort of that, again, the role of the zonal spatial variability. And you can see that looking, if you kind of even separate the float data into an Atlantic and an Indian Pacific, most of this outgassing, so this high signal here that's happening in this high latitude region, is really happening in the Indian Pacific. It's the clear bars, versus the Atlantic doesn't have a lot of outgassing. It's really in the Indian Pacific. So again, I think it's pointing to the importance of spatial variability in the Southern Ocean, and we can't think of everything as just happening in a 2D framework. And last thing to just finish up here is that if the carbon, you know, if the Southern Ocean isn't taking up as much carbon as before, as we thought, maybe, perhaps, based on the floats, that's what it seems like, you know, that where is this carbon uptake occurring? You know, we have pretty good estimates in the atmosphere. We know that there's not like a missing carbon sink in the atmosphere. So, you know, we're kind of thinking about where else we're not sampling very well with our current shipboard estimates. So this is, again, just an estimate or a map of sort of the data distribution from our shipboard measurements of surface PCO2. And you can see there's still lots of regions that aren't sampled by ships, and you know, there could be regions of the ocean that are taking up more carbon than we previously estimated, maybe at certain times of year or in just certain regions. And I'll just end by saying that that's sort of these questions of where is the ocean taking up carbon, are sort of one of the main motivations to expand this biogeochemical Argo array from just being in the Southern Ocean to being sort of global. So this project is now been funded by NSF. It's called the Global Ocean Biogeochemistry Array, or GO-BGC. And we're just getting started, but the basic idea is to deploy 500 BGC Argo floats in the global ocean over the next 5 years. And so, you know, that will, all the data, as with any kind of Argo project, is freely available. And so we'll be kind of hopefully enabling a lot more cool science in all parts of the world by building out this array. And so I guess with that, I will take any questions. And apologies again for the technical difficulties.
Thank you, Alison. A reminder, if you have a question, use your raise your hand button, or you can type it in the chat box. So go ahead, Shane.
So Alison, thank you very much for your talk. Sorry about your technical difficulties. So you mentioned, I think, that the Atlantic is not outgassing as much as the Indian and Pacific sectors. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, I mean, you could kind of see it here. It's also, you see a lot, so again, this is an estimate based on the floats and the shipboard data, and you can see it in the ship only estimates as well, that you have a lot of sort of uptake here and not a lot of red colors. And I think that's a really good question about why that is, and that's work that a lot of people have looked at. I don't think anybody's got a, or a lot of people are looking at, I should say. I don't think anybody has the answer. It could be related to biology. You have a lot of productivity here in the Argentine basin or on the Argentine shelf, and so it could be that you have just more biological uptake of carbon here and it suppresses that outgassing, or it could just be that the physical processes sort of supplying deep water to the surface in the Indian and the Pacific are different than in the Atlantic. And I'm glad you asked me about this, because I meant to say earlier that Channing Prind is a student at Scripps who have been working with to look at this from the floats, as well as using the Southern Ocean State Estimate and the biological version of that. So he's looking into this, and I hopefully will is about to submit a paper. So I think hopefully we'll get kind of a little bit more understanding.
Could it be like a downstream effect from drag passage, some interaction with topography?
That's certainly true. Certainly an option, and I think that's part of the story, because you do have this huge meridional excursion here, where right after the ACC flows through Drake Passage, you get this Malvinas kind of current coming up here, and there's so much eddy variability. It's very hard to model this as well, because it's a lot of small scale kind of interactions. The topography plays a big role. So you're bringing a lot of kind of cold water northward. So what's the role of sort of solubility in driving the CO2 exchange there? So I think it's not entirely clear yet, okay. But definitely part of the probably part of the story is the circulation there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's take a few more minutes for questions. I see that Isabella has a question. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes. Hi, Alison. Thanks for the really nice talk. I have sort of a technical question about your absolute geostrophic velocities from Argo. Do you reference those to the trajectories? And what kind of time step do you think you can get in the Southern Ocean?
Yeah. Let me go back to that plot. Yes. So I do reference them to the trajectory. So I use the trajectory data to estimate the sort of absolute velocity at the parking depth of the floats, and then use that as my reference level for the dynamic height calculation based on the TNS profiles. And I'm actually working on incorporating altimeter based velocities at the surface as well, to kind of give an additional constraint on the velocity. So that's work in progress. But this plot's just made from using the reference level field calculated from the Argo trajectories. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Yeah.
So the time step.
Yes.
You asked me about what kind of time step.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I feel like, the stuff that I'm doing now, the methods that I'm using kind of are doing the interpolation using both space and time. And I think that I haven't looked too closely yet at sort of what is the temporal resolution of the resulting product. I don't think I wouldn't expect to get anything better than maybe monthly, but I don't know if it's that good either. Okay. It could be sort of a 3-month average. I would, at this sort of best guess, I would feel most confident around a 3-month average.
Yeah, I've been doing some work with Josh Willis, who also uses altimetry and Argo trajectories sort of in tandem to get the reference velocity, and he estimates 3 months as well. So that's sort of consistent with what I've heard.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, he's done a lot of sort of the leading work on combining altimeter stuff with Argo, and it's good to hear he has a similar kind of estimate.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Alison? Another one from Shane. Go ahead.
Unless anybody else has a question, but so congratulations on the GoBCG project. That was announced a few days ago. I think congratulations, it's very exciting. Are you going to be having the same number of floats in the Southern Ocean sector with that program that you had during SOCOM?
Yeah, so there's some overlap between the two programs, and they're still, like, SOCOM is still kind of proceeding, and I think deploying about 30. I want to say it's about 30 floats a year for the next 4 years in the Southern Ocean. So that's going to kind of maintain the same density of the SOCOM array. And then the 500 floats that are part of GoBGC would kind of be on top of that. But again, there's some overlap in time, but anyway. But I don't know, does that answer your question? I think.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. They're actually, even though they're both funded by NSF, they're two separate projects with a lot of overlap. But yeah, the 500 floats, we plan to try to get them deployed as widely as possible. So definitely looking for like cruise opportunities, and we'll be deploying off of a lot of Go Ship cruises, but need others as well. So we're hoping to make it. I think the target, the target density for a global biogeochemical Argo array would be about 1,000 floats. And so the US, this NSF project would supply 500 floats, or will supply 500 floats over the next 5 years. And there's hope that the international community will kind of come together as they do in Argo and supply the other half of the array. So the idea is to have about 1,000 floats in the global ocean when we're done.
Yeah, this is Mike. To follow on that, I just will let everybody know, I think the co-chairs of the panel have already heard this, that U.S. CLIVAR Interagency Group approved U.S. CLIVAR support for a joint OCB U.S. CLIVAR workshop for next April, May, that will have two intentions: this engagement of the international community, so showcasing the capability of these profiling floats, so kind of a tutorial, if you will, on their capabilities, and also to engage the international community on the global deployment strategy. And importantly, they want the participation of OCB and CLIVAR scientists to help articulate to take up the use of the future data sets that will be available globally from the array. So more information will be coming forward on that. OCB is reviewing the request, or has reviewed the request, and we'll be hearing from them next week if it'll be supported by them. It'll be a virtual workshop, and we'll provide dates for that as we get that approval. I just wanted to give that a shout out.
Yeah, no, great. Thanks for mentioning that. Yes. I think it's great that that OCB and US CLIVAR are supporting this, and it's really important to have the community aspect right from the beginning of people using the data. It's going to be available just like the SOCOM data and Argo in general, in real time. So people can start thinking about ways of, incorporating this into their proposals and things like that. This data stream, yeah.
All right, I think that will wrap up our talk today. Thank you, Alison, for presenting, and thank you to all the participants for your patience as we sorted through all the technical difficulties. Everyone have a great day, and thank you for joining. Thank you.
Thank you.